let's get to it. Evan already alluded to it. We already talked about it. Josh Gordon is back, baby. I think people following this closely saw this was a very realistic possibility. And what sticks out to me is that the Patriots need him so desperately. You know, Gronk retired, N'Keal Harry banged up, and we're unsure where he is in terms of his preparation. Philip Dorsett, I think, is pretty dusty. You moved Josh Gordon, Evan, from wide receiver 53, which was already pretty high, to wide receiver 26. Tell the people what you think Josh Gordon, his outlook is going to be now that he's back in New England.
Yeah, and we had it in our top 150. We had it in our Patriots team preview, in our wide receiver tiers. We're just like, draft him multiple rounds ahead of his ADP because the writing was on the wall that he was probably going to get reinstated, that it was a little bit better than 50-50. And but what I did not necessarily expect was Josh Gordon being eligible to play in week 1. I thought that he might get like another little suspension tacked on, but apparently Roger Goodell gave him credit for time served. If you remember, he missed the last couple of regular season games, all 3 playoff games. So that was basically his, 5-game suspension. So yeah, I hiked him up from wide receiver 53 to wide receiver 26. He's right behind Allen Robinson. So I basically have him as a 5th or 6th round pick now. He still has a low floor because, he's got to stay in line. I'm sure that they're going to drug test the heck out of him all season long. And as a fallout from Josh Gordon being eligible for week 1 now, I moved Julian Edelman down 1 spot. He's now my wide receiver 15. I bumped Tom Brady up a full quarterback tier. Last year when Josh Gordon was in the lineup, Tom Brady averaged almost 2 more yards per pass attempt with Gordon in the lineup. That is huge. That's going from 7 yards per pass attempt, which is like mediocre to below average, to like 9 yards per pass attempt, which is elite. Now, N'Keal Harry is out of the top 150, and he's not draftable in season-long leagues. Also has turf toe. But, yeah, I like Josh Gordon as a fringe 5th, 6th round pick now.
Yeah. I think one thing people are going to say is, hey, Tom Brady can't throw deep anymore. Tom Brady just looks to check it down. I think people don't realize how efficient or how good Tom Brady was when he was throwing at Josh Gordon last year. So, and as I mentioned, I just think they need him so badly. I mean, they went from big trouble at wideout to injecting a talent like Josh Gordon is, and having a lot of upside there. So, yeah, certainly interesting. Happy to see Josh Gordon back. Evan, let's move to Antonio Brown. What a mess this is, man. And we had new news on Sunday that Mike Mayock called him out in the press saying, you're either all in or you're all out. Either show up with the helmet we give you or you find, or don't show up at all. I mean, I assume that Antonio Brown's ADP is absolutely tanking. You've been way down on him the whole time.
Yeah, this situation just continues to be a disaster. And we've had Antonio Brown as a fade and as an overvalued guy and as a prime bust candidate since the day that we put content on Establish the Run on July 15th. His ADP has somehow stayed in the top 10 receivers to this point. But the highest that we've had him is wide receiver 12. Right now he's at wide receiver 14. So you are not getting Antonio Brown if you're using our rankings and our tiers, and I'm very, very fine with that. You have this craziness with the foot thing, now with the helmet thing. He's talked about retiring multiple times. Does he really even want to play? I mean, I don't want my 2nd-round fantasy pick talking about retiring and skipping training camp where Antonio Brown needs to be developing chemistry in practice with his quarterback, Derek Carr. The Raiders' offensive line is already falling apart. You have, as you mentioned, Mike Mayock coming out and calling out Antonio Brown in the press. He's literally practiced for 30 minutes in training camp. Yeah, I'm letting other people draft Antonio Brown this year. I'm just going to take another guy.
Yeah. And I think even if Antonio Brown wasn't mentally unstable, which I kind of think he is, I had concerns about him anyways, going from a place in Pittsburgh, which was so pass heavy and so vertical, and had Ben Roethlisberger, to a place like Oakland with Derek Carr and a questionable scheme and a questionable talent around him, et cetera, et cetera. So even if you took all the off-field stuff away, I thought Antonio Brown was a pretty reasonable fade in this spot anyways. I wanted to get your take on one of Antonio Brown's old teammates a long time ago, Emmanuel Sanders, because, man, I cannot believe this, Evan. At 32 years old, Emmanuel Sanders, coming off of an Achilles tear, apparently is 100%, allegedly. And plans to be play on week 1. Actually, I think he might play tomorrow night in the preseason game. We don't know yet. Again, tonight is Sunday. They play Monday night. Have you considered moving down Deshaun Hamilton and moving Emmanuel Sanders into the top 150? I don't believe you have him in there right now.
Yeah, the reports have been consistently positive on Emmanuel Sanders' recovery all offseason and deep into camp and preseason, and that's great. I'm happy for Emmanuel Sanders, but I don't want Emmanuel Sanders on my fantasy team. I don't want any 32-year-old receiver coming off a late season Achilles tear on my fantasy team when his quarterback's Joe Flacco and could eventually be a second-round rookie in Drew Lock on a run-first team. So you can have Emmanuel Sanders. I'm not taking him. He's not going in the top 150, and I'm going to be stubborn about that, and I'm totally fine with it if I'm wrong. This is a process thing. I may have to move down to Deshaun Hamilton. That's I probably should, but no, I'm not jumping on the Emmanuel Sanders train. Considering his situation, his offensive environment. No, thank you.
Yeah, I've faded 30-year-olds for much less than blowing out their Achilles 8 months ago. I mean, I can't believe that this rehab. It's like mind-boggling, and maybe we'll have to talk to Dr. Chow about that too, because, man, this would be one for the ages. CSU Ram, friend of the show, is like still complaining about his Achilles tear from like 4 years ago. So, anyways, but a guy you recently moved up just a couple spots, just a small little bump, but you gave Will Fuller a bump from wide receiver 32 to wide receiver 30. Will Fuller is coming off an ACL tear. However, reports have been extremely glowing on Will Fuller. We know what he's been able to do with Deshaun Watson in the past. I don't think Duke Johnson affects Will Fuller nearly as much as he affects Kiki Kute. Where are you at on Will Fuller?
Yeah, this is another situation where I just want to have Will Fuller ahead of his ADP, because I want to be drafting him myself, and I want, the establish the run team to be getting him. So I just want to make sure I'm always like 4 or 5 spots ahead of his ADP. So he's been healthy in training camp. Health has always been the biggest question for Will Fuller since he got into the league. He has 11 touchdowns over his last 16 games. Kiki Kute now questionable for week 1 due to that ankle injury. So Will Fuller is a guy that I want. And right now I have him as the wide receiver 31. I've been looking at maybe moving him up a few more spots too. His ADP right now is wide receiver 35. So if you're using the rankings, you're using the tiers, good chance you'll be drafting Will Fuller. And that's something that I want. I want him as my wide receiver 4, and would not even be disappointed if I took him as my wide receiver 3 after like going running back heavy in the early rounds.
Yeah. Like guys like Will Fuller was like a big turning point for me in playing DFS cash, like on DraftKings. In the past, like when I first started playing, I would never use like a really high ADOT, a really high average depth of target guy who was only going to get 6 or 7 targets. But then, man, I mean, all you need is like when Will Fuller is down there at like 4K, 4,500 as he was, and I'm not saying he'll be there this year on DK, but all you need is a couple of those, 1 or 2 of those long passes, and he's just smashing. He just has upside to break the slate for you, which I think makes a big difference rather than taking a lot of the safety on some of these possession guys. All right. Anyways, we're going to get into all that DFS stuff closer to the season. For Evan's top 150, which we discussed here, he's dedicated his entire life to keeping it updated for you guys and making sure it's the best that it can be. It's all he does. You can find it in our draft kit, which is if you purchase a la carte by itself, is only $30. Check that out at establishthерun.com.